gang. Here's to nights that turn into mornings and friends that turn into family. Cheers!
Hello, and welcome to the Friendship IRL podcast. I'm your host, Alex Alexander. My friends, they would tell you I like to ask the hard questions. You know who I am in the group. I'm the person that's saying, okay, I'm going to ask this question, but don't feel like you have to answer it. And now I can be that friend for you too. If I could go back and tell 20-year-old Alex something about friendship, what would I tell her? That is basically the underlying theme of today's episode. And if there's one thing that I did not include in this episode that I could go back and tell her, I think the main thing I would tell her is like, guys, I had the worst social anxiety hangover, basically. I would hang out with people and then I would be so worried about the things I said and the things I did. And it's not even like I did that bad of things. And we all know sometimes I say the things that nobody wants to say. So there definitely was a learning curve to that. Okay. But quite often I should have just asked my friends instead of ruminating and panicking, because more often than not, it was fine. And if it wasn't fine, they could have just told me and we could have had a conversation and I could have apologized and done the work to not repeat that behavior. So if I could go back, that's something I would tell myself. But there are so many other rich examples in this episode of what we wish we had known in our 30s. Let me tell you a little bit about today's guest. Arpita Mehta is a brand strategist and marketer by profession with a career working at the intersection of digital media and women's style. However, in her spare time, as someone who is passionate about building community and having honest conversations when it comes to our lifestyle, she decided to follow her passion and pivot careers into working for herself and building out her podcast, The Modern Millennial, creating a space in media she has envisioned ever since she started out in this world. Now, Arpita is also the creator of Little Brown Diary, which is a Facebook community of over 38,000 South Asian millennial women. This was such a fun conversation where we really went through just a variety of things that we have learned now that we are in our 30s about friendship that probably would have saved us so much headache and frustration and turmoil in our 20s. But can't go back now, but we can share what we wish we had known on the air, on this podcast, for everyone to hear. And while this is centered around two 30-something women sharing what we wish we had known, I do think you're going to hear this theme in the podcast, which is like, we've never been taught about friendship. So while these might be lessons that Arpita and I have learned, they might be lessons that you're still frustrated with yourself over. Even if you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, and you know what? You might have lessons that we didn't mention and we're still trying to figure out. And if that's the case, reach out because we should talk about it on the podcast. Let's share those. Without further ado, let's get to today's episode. I'm so excited that you're here. I feel like I hung out with you this morning because I actually listened to a couple episodes of your podcast.
Oh my gosh. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me here. This is actually my first podcast where I'm being interviewed and not the opposite.
Really?
So I'm very excited, one, to be here. I love your podcast and I'm honored that you took some time to listen to The Modern Millennial this morning.
Well, you have some great topics on there. Like I was just scrolling through. I know, I get it. When you are doing this yourself, when you're recording your own podcast, do you ever think about this? Like you just put it out there and people, like this morning, you were doing, I don't know what you were doing. And I was walking around with AirPods in my house listening to your voice. And that's so wild that we just press send.
I did the same with your podcast a couple weeks ago when I was introduced to your podcast by someone who we both like love and follow, Julia. And I think about this often. I'm like, people listen to my voice. Like people listen to our thoughts, our deepest, darkest inner thoughts and feelings. And some days it freaks me out. And some days I'm like, wait, this is awesome. So today is one of those days where I'm like, this is very awesome. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah. Like I learned so much from your podcast. You were listening to mine. It's so cool that we can create these things and put them out there. Yeah. But as the creator, there's something to be said about you have no idea what's happening, what people are thinking after you hit send. I mean, sure, some people send us messages, but there are plenty of people who are listening that we have no idea. And you don't know until you hear from people. And I think that adds up when you do hear that somebody was listening.
Absolutely. And I think like in this world of instant gratification, podcasting is one of the few mediums that doesn't have instant gratification. Whereas like if you're a video creator or you're putting out pictures on Instagram, you get the likes and the comments. But for this, it took me, as someone being really impatient, a really long time to get used to the fact that right away, people aren't going to listen and they're not going to tell you if it's good, bad, or, you have to kind of like sit with it. And I agree. You never know what people are thinking or if they're listening silently without sharing feedback. So you're just kind of putting it out there and then letting the world do the rest.
Yeah. Or if they're sharing it with people. Yeah. If it's soaked into their conversations. Like I try and remember myself when I'm telling someone about a podcast I listen to, that somebody else created that. And they have no idea that I'm telling you to listen to it. So somebody might be doing that for mine. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely happening. It's weird synergies of the world we live in. I love it.
Well, can you tell everybody listening, since we've talked all about this, a little bit about your podcast?
Absolutely. I would love to. So my podcast is called The Modern Millennial. I launched it last year and really it was an antidote to life. I went through a really tough health year last year. I ended up having a surgery with a lot of stomach and, GI digestive issues. And I just needed an outlet to share my thoughts. I was turning 30. A lot of things were happening. And I come from a South Asian background. I'm an Indian American. And in the communities that I grew up in and a lot of my surroundings, we don't talk about a lot of things, especially when it comes to life. And I've always been a lifestyle person. I love beauty, wellness, everything that comes with lifestyle, but also the hard to hit topics, mental health, self-growth, relationships, marriage, friendships. And I decided that all the thoughts I had that I would journal or talk to my friends about needed to just be said because I was just like holding it up inside me and I was just going through a moment. And so that kind of manifested in The Modern Millennial and it turned into a podcast for self-learning for myself, topics that I needed to learn more about. And it kind of turned into a place for me to kind of share what I'm going through, but also help others when it comes to any of these topics that fall under the very large, vast lifestyle umbrella.
Yeah. I mean, one, kudos to you for making a podcast and doing the thing, putting it out there, because I'm sure you thought about it for a while. I thought about it for a while before you decided to make the jump.
Yes.
But I'm sure there's so many people, like listeners out there, who appreciate it because they probably want to be having these conversations too. And hopefully they're inspired by you. I mean, I was inspired by you when I listened today to not only listen to your podcast, but like maybe it gives them a little courage to try and have these conversations with the people in their lives.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. It's definitely was and I'm sure too, with your friendship driven podcast, which does tackle like a lot of both like good, bad, and ugly topics. And it's not easy to do that. Obviously there's fun episodes where, I can talk about pop culture or beauty and skincare, but then you're also talking about things like your marriages or your friendships. And it took me a long time to get out of the box of like, I want to say these things. I just need to stop worrying about everyone else and actually do the thing. And once I kind of ripped that Band-Aid, it just became a whole lot easier from there.
Yeah. Once you start doing it, which I think is a metaphor for anybody listening, once you start having these conversations in your real life too, that is just as impactful as us hitting record and setting up our microphones.
Absolutely. This is just like a medium to help inspire conversations IRL, going back to the name of your podcast. Like it really is like a place to be like, okay, you should have comfortable spaces to have these conversations with people in your life.
Yeah. Have you covered any friendship topics on your podcast?
It's actually really funny. It has been one of my like most requested topics and one that I've been deeply wanting to do. I've done one like half episode on it, but never fully in depth. So I'm really stoked for this because it's been a long time coming and I've just learned so much from listening to yours about friendship.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I think for a lot of people, I feel that when I tell people I talk about community and friendship, one, people get really nervous.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a lot of shame around this topic, a lot of feelings of that you're the only one experiencing this, or you're lesser than because of the friendship situation you have, or whatever people's feeling. So they kind of shrink back.
Yeah.
And then when I start talking and saying the things I say, which are a lot of, the way we think about friendship sucks. We need to rewrite the narrative. We need to be talking about this. What I watch is this explosion of conversation. Like there's like a spark in the room. Everybody's dying to talk about this. So I'm not shocked at all that people are asking you to talk about it. And we need as many people talking about it as possible just to normalize the spectrum of experiences that are happening. Nothing is weird about you because of how you feel about your friendships. Somebody else is there.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. It is such a underspoken about topic and doesn't get the limelight it needs. And I think, you and I chatted about this briefly when we first connected, but it's as important as relationships, as romantic relationships. Oh, yeah. And we talk about dating and marriage and all the aspects associated with that world so much. And there's so much conversation about it, but there's not enough about friendship. And specifically, I think also female friendships, because I think that also, adds a whole other lens to it.
Yeah. I mean, when you're out there, I have my algorithms very trained now to send me all friendship content.
Yeah.
And people are starting to talk about the fact that these are very important relationships.
Yeah.
People also maybe showcase the limiting beliefs they have about these relationships. It's only possible if you're a certain type of person, or only one or two friends are worth it, or it's really hard to make friends. So if you find the right ones, keep them, hold on to them, like do anything. There's kind of this desperation, dare I say, around this topic. And I think so much of that has to do with the fact that we have such a limited definition of what a friend is, what makes someone worth staying connected to. Like that shows up in the media we're consuming.
Absolutely. I think we're taught to just be one kind of friend from like an early age. We're conditioned in that way. And a lot of us, and, just I'm speaking from my experience here, like, I think we put so much emphasis as millennials on like succeeding in your careers and then marriage. And, again, coming from like a cultural background, like, settling, finding the right partner, like there's so much conditioning and learning that happens with that. But we were never really taught how to be a good friend or what it means to be a good friend or how to find good friends. There was always like right from wrong on like, okay, you should, stay away from these kind of people or, learn from your friends, like little things like that, but never like the heartbreak that comes with friendships or the fact that your friends will constantly change. Like these things that we learn as we get older. God, I wish like, if you were like 12 or 13 and you knew some of these things, like it would make life a little bit easier as you're getting older and you're like, okay, this is a part of life, just like growing up.
And here we are with two gems right off the bat. First one, this focus on romantic partnership and career and honestly quite a lot of things before we ever put focus on friendship, which if you think about it is kind of wild because friends were kind of our first focus. I've talked about this before. And then like we get to this late 20s, early 30s, and this thing that has been encouraged for so long is now just like, that's not really important anymore, which is wild, absolutely wild to me. So the point is just calling that out, questioning, like, is that serving me? You get to control your own priorities at the end of the day. It does not have to be the ones that are pushed by society or culture or family or friends. You can pick your own. The second gem is this idea that we should be good at being a friend, at making friends, when in reality, we've never really been taught this skill set. Like, if you think about it, this is not something that most people learn from someone else. Like, you have to go through trial and error. And I want to read you something. This is actually from a message that one of you sent me. And I just think it hits home. So maybe you recognize this. Maybe you sent this to me if you're listening. But I want to read this out loud. The message says, "We go to school for decades and we learn a lot of things, but learning how to make and be a good friend is not something most people are taught unless you happen to have lucked out with well-equipped parents. Most of us have to learn through trial and error, through a life lived, which means a lot of failed friendships, as well as pain, regret, and loneliness along the way. What if it didn't have to be that way, though?" And I wanted to read you that one because it's so beautifully written, but two, because when you hear it that way, it's just so succinct and it makes you realize that you're not bad at making friends. You're just having to teach yourself. And when we teach ourselves anything, there are trials and tribulations and failures and disappointment and frustrations. So if nobody's told you lately, you're doing a great job.
Yeah, I had a podcast reel that went viral recently on Instagram. I think it's at like almost 700,000 views, which,
Oh my gosh.
on Instagram, right, is unheard of right now.
That's
But it
amazing.
It talks about how I hear from millennials all the time. Now, this is not everyone's experience, but I hear this quite often, that they never really saw their parents have friends. And I bring that up because that means we weren't really modeled how to have adult friendships. So what we knew about friendship was going to school, where you saw the same friends every day. You had so many shared experiences, so much familiarity with, the same teachers, the same school rules, the same place. And it's a whole different skill set to get out into the world and have to be so intentional about our friendships. And we're just really not discussing that. We're not taught that. Like, there are skills and habits that are required to maintain these relationships. And then if your friendships fall apart as an adult, or you feel like you don't know how to make them, there, again, that is like all that shame that comes from it. So I think to start with, we just need to release that shame and be like, we were never taught this. We are relearning what it's like to be friends. There's nothing wrong with you if you don't know, because there's not much attention put on this.
Yeah. Again, like everything you're saying is just hitting so home for me, because I think that for the first time in my 30s or towards the end of like my 20s in the pandemic, did I actually think about the word friendship and what that meant to me and who I was as a friend. And I'm not saying like I'm got it all completely wrong, but I needed a lot of unlearning and relearning and a lot of reflection. And I think I'm just starting that journey right now. Like, I'm not even anywhere close to where I would want to be, because so much of what I thought a friend was and being a friend was just like from the media and the movies and like, just the world we live in versus real life examples.
I don't think I have it all together. I've said that on this podcast multiple times. I talk about this all the time. I am figuring it out just as much as anybody else. And quite often, I think we can compare it to any other long-term part of our life, right? Your finances or your health. There are going to be ups and downs. There are going to be moments where you've prioritized something else and you realize you want to refocus here. Even I've been doing that the last year, maybe, right? To get my business up off the ground, I've had to direct a lot of attention here. And it's pulled my attention away from my friendships.
Yeah.
There are things that I am trying to re-implement now. There are things I'm realizing nobody has it figured out, is all I'm trying to say.
100%. And I think that that's what we fool ourselves into thinking for friendships and for so many other parts of your life, whether it's your career or your relationship. Like, it can look like people have it together, but really no one does. And I think that friendship is one of those things that's, like you said, like health or your finances or even like your personal relationship with yourself. It's ever evolving. I don't think we'll be the same friends we are now when we're 40 and 50 and like, it just keeps evolving, and you have to be okay with that. And I think that for me was like the first self-realization on this topic.
So in today's episode, I'm hoping we can talk about like maybe some of the things we've realized as we've figured out how we like to show up as friends and what that takes now that we're a little older, a little wiser. Things I wish I had known in my 20s, maybe, is a good way to put it. And
yes.
One of those is something you actually already mentioned, which is figuring out what being a friend means to you. Do you have any thoughts, like things you've been realizing lately that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the one thing that I struggled with was, I came from groups of friends from very young age, a lot of groups of friends, family friends, community friends, school friends, like college. I was on a dance team. I was always surrounded by lots of people. And that led to having really good, fun, shared experiences and feeling like I was the friend that was, like in the middle of everyone, like, just pacifying everyone, being like the group mom, or like, I'm talking about exactly that stereotype. Yep, exactly.
The connector.
It's the same, this connector. That's the word I'm looking for. Every time I did one of those like personality tests at work, it was like, all right, you're the connector, you're the connector. And so I thought that was always a fabulous, fantastic thing. Like, oh, you're the peacemaker, you're the one in the middle. What I realized now is that took me away from having really deep relationships with 1, 2, or 3 people that I feel like I could be my whole vulnerable, full self with, because I was so, just focused on making sure that the group was happy. And there's a few things that, add themselves to here. One, like, I tend to be a people pleaser, and that's also something I'm working on. And connectors are usually associated with that because you're trying to kind of make sure that you're not rocking the boat. And I think that I realized that being a friend is not being at the center of the group or trying to make everyone happy or being that person that's friends with everyone. It's actually showing up and going out of your way for that 1, 2, or 3 people, whoever they are, who really need you or who you connect with the most. But I never gave myself a chance to get to that point. And I wouldn't say I regret it, but I feel like I could have showed up differently in a lot of my friendships because I was surrounded by a lot of really awesome people, but I never let myself get past that point because I felt like I didn't know myself enough, and I maybe was insecure in some of my relationships. So I thought that by being, again, at the center would be easier. So I think that's something that is painful to admit, honestly. And it took me a while to kind of say that because not everyone likes to say that out loud, but I think it's a great learning and for me to kind of show up differently in my 30s now that I'm making new friends and, like you said, older, wiser.
I have never talked about the friend group quite that way. And so I love that you just shared that with everybody. Again, the vulnerable shares we make on the internet. It had me thinking, because I also have been the connector, the person who invites people. And I would agree with you. When I was younger, I kind of felt like that role had to be all encompassing, I guess. So if I invited everyone, then I also had to do all the work and make sure everyone was happy and like fill all the roles and just let everyone else be a guest. And I think the older I've gotten, the more I've realized that being the connector or the initiator is just one of the roles. And hopefully, if the group is, I want to say healthy, but I don't know if that's the right word. If the group is filled with other people who care about maintaining the group, just because I've been the connector or the initiator doesn't mean I have to do all the other work and everybody else can be responsible for like checking in on people or actually planning the gathering or doing the thing. So then I can also enjoy the time spent in the group and have some of those one-on-one connections. Because if you're always the person that's trying to do all the things, you're right. You never get to sit down and like have a one-on-one conversation.
Absolutely.
The thing I think most people forget about a friend group is the group is great, but a group is just a bunch of interconnected individual friendships. Like the group will not survive if people don't build individual relationships. So you actually need to put more attention on those individual relationships in the group to varying levels of closeness. Like you don't have to be equally close or besties with everybody in the group, but you have to have some form of connection for it to keep going. So yeah, you can't do all the things and have time for those individual connections.
If you are listening to this and you're like, what are you talking about with the individual relationships versus the group? Go listen to episode 42 with Brandy. Number one, because it is a riot of an episode. It was so much fun. Number two, that episode is about friend trios, but the same principle applies to friend groups. And I really dive into this idea that in order for a group or a trio to exist, you need to invest in the individual relationships. And Brandy has a really beautiful friend trio with a lot of examples of in practice what that looks like. So head over to episode 42. But the other thing I wanted to touch on here or expand on maybe the more that I have thought about this conversation about friend groups and this idea of like being the connector is I have taken on that role quite a bit in my life. And if I'm being honest, Michael does it even more than I do. But we love being a connector. We love bringing different groups of people together. We love inviting new people in. We love introducing our work friends to our oldest friends, our acquaintances, and like inviting them in. We love doing this. But what I want to call out is that doing that, being the connector, is emotional labor. It's work, which is why if you pigeonhole yourself into this role, people can get burnt out. And there's a lot of frustrations with always being the initiator. And I get it. So I want to try and reframe this for you, right? Being the connector is super empowering. Doing that work means that you have the skill set to bring different people together, to initiate these gatherings, to be the brave friend and make the invite, even though nobody may show up at your door. So that's empowering. If you are burnt out, this might be a great time to have some subtle conversations with other friends and people in the group about how this is empowering. And if they want to bring together their own group in maybe another part of life, that this is a skill set they can practice in a group that's already pretty used to coming together. Like you've done a lot of the initial legwork, maybe if you're the initiator. Everybody's used to getting together, and this allows everybody else a space to practice where you're pretty sure people are going to show up at your door. Okay, that's number one. Number two, if something ever happened and you, the connector, were not a part of this group anymore, or maybe you moved across the world, your life circumstances changed, I don't know. If you were not around anymore, this allows the other people in that friend group the practice to keep that group alive if they want, if they so choose, if it is worth it to them. So by reminding everybody that like this is an empowering skill set to have for any area of your life, but also if you enjoy this group to keep it alive, it is worth investing in being the initiator. And doing so might inspire people to put a little of that emotional labor in and become the initiator sometimes. And look at you being a leader and inspiring other people to develop this skill set. And at the end of the day, hopefully, in them doing that, it relieves some of the pressure from you feeling like you have to do it all the time. And you have just inspired a friend to develop a really, really empowering tool that will last them for the rest of their lives.
And I think like the group friendships don't survive or won't last as long if those individual relationships don't
Yes.
exist. And I've seen that happen, right? Like groups disintegrate because everyone kind of loses touch with each other. Or if your situation changes, like, you know, your shared experience shifts, whether you're at work or whether you're in college or school and you move on to the next thing, it can easily fall apart if you don't have those one-on-one emotional bonds. And I think that is a common, at least millennial experience that happens across the board as we constantly are changing stages of life, jobs, you know, things like that.
Yeah, I hear a lot of people talk negatively about friend groups as adults. And I love a group of friends, but I think I love a group of friends because it doesn't have this pressure. The ones I'm in, at least, there's no pressure for everybody to be everybody's bestie. You all just kind of show up. You enjoy the parts you enjoy about each other. We are way more focused on honoring the individual relationships in the group than we are trying to make them equal. Like, it's just as important for me that other friends that have found some connection point really develop that as it is for me to enjoy my time with them.
Yeah.
So I really love a friend group as an adult, but I also know a lot of people don't.
Yeah, I agree. I don't feel like positive or negative. I think that I filled a lot of my formative 20s with group friendships. And I think where I lacked was developing individual relationships. And so for me, I love group friendships, but something that I want to work on this year and, you know, just moving forward is great. You have all these fabulous groups of friends in your life, but you need to start focusing on the people that really, you know, speak to you and not have it be, oh, it needs to be with all these people because then they're also all friends with them. And, you know, the mind games that happen when you think about these things. And so absolutely, I completely agree.
Yeah, there's something really different about with the group. I get it. People get caught in this cycle of, well, if I'm going to hang out with one person, I have to invite everyone. And I think there's depending on the size of the group, there's a point where you're just like, yes, you should invite everyone because you've invited almost everyone in, I guess, a bigger group. If this is like 3 people, then ignore my rule, or 4 people.
Right.
But if we're talking, you know, 8, 10, 12, whether it's couples or friends or whatever, you know, when you get almost everyone, you should probably just invite everyone kind of thing. But it is more important to do things with individual people and really develop those relationships, because that is the actual glue that is holding the group together.
Absolutely. That is the crux, the foundation, like the key to any friendship, whether it's a group or like, you know, an individual. I think one-on-one time is unmatched, and you can't compare going out with a group of friends or going on vacation with a bunch of people to like a dinner with just 2 people where it's just you and them in the most intimate of settings and you're just talking. And that, I think, is something that we do less and less of. And the pandemic obviously shifted that, but it's especially, I don't know, I live in New York City, and it's also depending on where you live, like a lot of the socializing is very group driven. It's like, oh, we're all going out, or we're all going here, or we're all doing this. And it leaves less time for making space for those individual bonds, especially when you're, you know, in a relationship, you're married, you have another person, you know, this all changes the dynamic. So it's really important to take a step back to say, okay, where am I going to actually, like, it becomes part of, at least for me, like my to-do list for the year. Like, it sounds bizarre because like,
oh, no,
making
it's
friends.
Not.
Yeah.
I
But,
put
you know,
friendship stuff on my to-do list.
Right. It is.
That's
and, you know, I
normal.
learned this from a good friend. She makes like OKRs or like KPIs for the year for herself. And at first I was like, this is intense, but friendship, she's the first person I saw that had friendships, but she had distilled it down so clearly to not just like, oh, make more friends, but it's like spend meaningful more time. And she had actually made a list of people in her life, you know, in priority that she wanted to make more space for. And I thought that was so commendable because it takes a lot to, 1, recognize that, and 2, to actually hold yourself accountable for that. And I think that's something I want to take away from her and to do that for myself.
For anybody listening that wants to do that, I have a couple podcast episodes on it. That's like the foundation of my book. I also make friendship goals. And normally, so there's like a list of people. There's also like, here's areas of my life where I don't feel very connected to somebody, where I could use, like, for example, last year was, I need some more online business friends. I need people who get this area of my life, because most of my everyday, like in real life friends don't get that. And I deserve support in this area of life and people. And well, I went out to find those people for a specific reason. I also have met so many lovely people that I stay in contact with about more than just this area of life.
The business.
And there are others where it's just about business. And like, that's worth it. That connection is like valuable in my life. A goal we did, my husband and I did, was if we're going to travel and see someone, because we do have the flexibility to work remotely, we don't want to just fly in on Friday and fly out on Sunday. We want to fly in on like Wednesday night. We want to use our money to pay for a co-working space on Thursday, so we can work, but we can hang out on Thursday night and stretch out that time. Because if we're really flying to see someone maybe once a year, twice a year, an extra 24 to 48 hours adds up.
Oh, I love that. That is, I'm just like thinking, because I have so many trips planned, which are just like Friday to Sunday. And yeah, I love that. Especially because the time is so short. Like when you see someone, you fly in, you get in late Friday, you leave Sunday morning, you basically have 24 hours on Saturday to hang out with them, and that's it.
Yeah. So like a goal being, how do we figure out a way to stretch this out, but make it work for everyone? You know, sometimes people are able to take a day off and other times they aren't. And we're just as happy to work during the day and be able to sit around their dining room table at night and like play some board games on Thursday. That's still extra hours we wouldn't get otherwise.
Yeah. Intentional. I think it's like being intentional about all the things you do, whether it's a trip or even if it's going out at night for drinks. Like, I think intention is missing in a lot of friendships, and especially in your 20s. I know it was for me.
Yeah. And then you get like, what actions are we doing that add up and make a difference? And it's going to look different for you, and it's going to look different for me.
Absolutely. And it's in the small things. It's in the small shifts that you make that you can start to see, you know, big things. It's not like, we all know this, but nothing is like instant or overnight, and you can't overhaul all your friends in one day.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, I was looking through like some of the things we were chatting about here. You're talking about like, you can't overhaul it in one day. So much of this is just a consistent, intentional practice. Like for anybody who is out there who is not happy with their current friendship situation, this area of your life is no different than getting your finances in order and auto depositing a small amount of money in your bank account every month and like checking in on your monthly money date. It's no different than deciding you're going to run a marathon and lacing up your shoes and going on a training run every day. Like, it's the small things and consciously choosing to do them to the point where it becomes second nature that you haven't talked to any of your friends this week and you kind of feel off. Like you might, if you were training for a marathon and you hadn't laced up your shoes all week, and then you're kind of more naturally inclined to do this. And then at a certain point, maybe something big comes up in life and your focus is elsewhere. And after a while you check in and decide you need to get back into that habit. Like, this is no different. It's all the little intentional things that build
100%.
The friendship situation that you want.
Yeah. It's like both parties or both sides working at it every single day, just the way relationship, like you said, or your wellness or your health, whatever it is. Yeah. And I think that that is something that people don't think about, because friends come so easily to you early on in your career. They're handed to you in school and in extracurriculars or in college. And it's the convenience of it. You don't have to try, and you have friends waiting for you in every corner. It's when things get tough and you kind of adult, you realize, and especially like for me, like after getting married, the pandemic, like life changing, like really busy schedules, you realize that, oh, if you don't put in the consistent effort, that's when things fall through the cracks, just like anything else would.
Yeah. What is your take on this notion that's out there, this, I feel like, very societal message that you hear a lot of people say that you just need a couple close people and you're good? Because my take is the opposite. So tell me what yours is.
Yeah, I disagree with that take on people say you need a couple close friends. I think that it's really important. And it goes back to what you were saying earlier. Like last year, you realized that you needed more friends in the digital business world because your existing friends didn't really understand what you're doing. I think it is so important in the world we live in today to have friends that meet different needs for you and different parts of you, because we're all very multidimensional people. Even if you work one job and you don't have like 10 different things you're doing, like we all have different interests. We all have different things we're doing. We're all at different stages of life. And so I think it's really important to not fit one or two friends to be your everything. You could have one best friend or two best friends that know everything about your life, but it's important to find friends that have shared experiences. So let's say you're a digital business owner, to have a community there that supports you. Or if you love to sew, like have sewing friends, whatever your hobbies are, your interests are. And like my husband just started running marathons and he created a little group of people through people he knows, and they run together or they have a text chain. All they talk about is running. Maybe they go to like drinks or dinner once in a while, but they're not looking for more, right? Like they're there to just be the running group or the running friends, but that serves a need because he could never do that with some of his other groups of friends or with like, our friends. And so I think that I agree to a certain extent. You don't need 20 people that know every single thing about you.
Yes.
You don't need to be so deep with the whole world, but it's fine to have tier B, tier C, and not like saying they're less important, but they're simpler. You have like, yes, exactly. It's simpler. You don't need to make it complicated. Go out, talk about what you like, come home, have a great time. And it doesn't need to be so deep every single time. And I think that's what keeps, at least for me, keeps me going, keeps me excited about meeting new people and talking to them. And so I completely disagree with, you just need two friends in life and then you're good to go, forever.
I was just thinking that all or nothing narrative, that narrative of, you just need a couple close people who get all the parts of you. It's so much work to have those all encompassing friendships. It's a lot of work to like navigate life changes and handle conversations about miscommunications, and like it's work. And yet somehow we like want all that work. We're trying to like force every friendship or a lot of friendships to be that. So I get why we're saying we don't want 100 of those friendships, because that would be a lot of work, but it's also totally valuable, like you're saying, to have those simpler friendships that aren't as much work. Like just allow them to be what they are.
Yeah, exactly. Not everything needs to be deeper. And I say this from experience of like trying to fit. It's like a square peg in a round hole or whatever that saying is, where I was trying to make everyone my closest friend because I thought that that's the way to connect, like especially in my early 20s. And I'm realizing now that like certain friends are meant to be where they are. And especially when there's like a history, like you have had a familial connection or you've known each other for years and years, that can always stay with you and you have that shared experience and you can continue to maintain that friendship, but it doesn't need to turn into more. And it's exhausting to do that. And I think we don't have time. Like we're all too busy to do that. We're all trying to stay afloat with the relationships that we do have.
Have you had any friendships, whether you wanted them to turn into more or they wanted them to turn into more? And like, how did you navigate that?
Yeah, 100%. I feel like that's all I did. After college, I had a tough time trying to figure out who my friends were. I was living in the city. I was trying to kind of go out of my way to really connect with people and be like my authentic self. But I realized that like not everyone was looking for me to be their best friend.
Yeah.
And I kind of learned it the other way, where it was like, I was putting in a lot of effort and it wasn't being reciprocated, but I kept thinking something's wrong with me. Like, am I the problem here? Like, hi, is it me? Like, am I the problem? But it was just because I was putting that in, that doesn't mean the other person needs to do that as well. Because that person probably put me in a category in his or her life where I was like, maybe tier B friend or tier C, which is now I'm saying like in hindsight, that was totally okay. But I've been in that and I've really struggled with that because again, goes back to me having more group friendships, and I was trying to develop more one-on-one friendships because I thought the way to get older was having like 3 or 4 best friends and that's it. So it was really like a twisted narrative that was in my head. And it took a while to get out of the, am I the problem? Is this me? And I think it went to the fact that we're not taught how to be friends, and we're not told how to maintain friendships. And we're really not told that friendships change. And so like someone when I was 26 who maybe I was trying to become close to, I'm best friends with today at 31. And maybe something shifted in the last 6-7 years, right? But we're not told that these things can change and evolve with time, and that's okay. And that would have saved me a whole lot of grief.
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole hope of this podcast, right? Is we're sharing real life stories and real life experiences, because I think so many people get their ideas of what friendship should look like. I mean, from movies, from that, but also from like fluffy quotes. Nothing drives me more nuts than a fluffy friendship quote. Then, like, I get it. I get the underlying, we're friends for a reason or a season or whatever. What the heck does that look like? Because you can say that all you want, but that doesn't mean that when somebody, announces that they're about to have a baby, you're like, oh, was that deep friendship I've had for 10 years just a season? Shoot. Like, that's a bummer. That hurts. Navigating that is hard. In the first time, like trying to figure out your feelings becomes easier. If anybody's listening, like the more people have babies and things change, the more you navigate the changes, it becomes easier. But like, I feel like so much conversation around friendship is this thing is happening, and then somebody responds by just saying, oh, well, friendships are meant for a reason or a season. Like, okay.
Yeah, you're like, it's not like, oh, the second, like someone literally, like you said, announces they're having a baby or gets married, you're like, okay, peace out. That was my season. Like, I'm done. Like, let's on to the next. No, I agree with you. The quote, like, it just really pisses me off, especially when it's like, friendships are like 3 a.m. drives and midnight calls and 8-hour phone calls. And I know that's skewing to a little bit more of a younger, high school, early college experience, but still, I'm like, this is the reason. This is why people get set up to not have healthy friendships, because that's what the Tumblr era was the era that I grew up in, and the quotes and the pictures and the manifestations of what friendship, female friendships, all kinds of friendships look like. It's not reality, and you see that. And I laugh every time I see TikTok. That's why I love TikTok, when I see like people like just in their room being like, is it me or am I the only one that doesn't have a group of friends? And people are so real about these realizations. And I'm like, no, I always want to comment and be like, no, you're doing it right. Like you're okay. Like it's the people that are buying into the hallmark, quote unquote, friendships that struggle with it. Because while there are probably those moments where you may have the 3 a.m. calls and the midnight drives or whatever it is, it's not every day, right? And that's not reality. That's not your 30s or your 40s. And if I could tell someone who was, 10 that today or 11, like that would be my advice. It's like, make friends, make a lot of friends, but don't pretend like they need to be like the movies or what you see in media.
And whatever also, something like looks like the hallmark. So I have a variety of close individual friendships, smaller groups. There is this one like group, and we are, I don't even know, like 20, 30 people at this point. It's so many people, like the margin of error is 10 people.
Yeah.
But, if you looked at that, if I posted photos of that, it would look like the hallmark. But what I try and remind people is what you don't see is that certain people are really more so just like acquaintances in that group. There are multiple closer groups within that group. There are people who had a hurt feeling and we're trying to navigate the conversation of that, like you don't know. You don't know what's happening. You just see the picture. And you just see the picture. Think to yourself that it looks like the movies. Yeah. But that's not the reality.
It's not. And I know I have, like, I could put myself in that same situation because I have a similar sort of experience. And there's something that, maybe we don't talk about enough is I think personally, there's a lot to learn from the way men, like, traditionally are friends.
Mhm.
And I say this all the time to the people around me. I very much admire my husband and his group of friends. They've known each other since they were in not even high school, middle school, for years and years and years. And if this was a group of girls, the amount of hurt,
Mhm.
the amount of emotion, the amount of chaos that would have ensued. But because guys deal with friendships so differently, they have been able to maintain a level of friendship that I think is so admirable. And not everyone's best friends in the group.
Yep.
They do their own thing. They don't talk for months. But when they come back together, it's like they are starting from scratch. And of course, men and women are very different. And, the different way we process things and emotions and all of that. But there's a lot to learn from that because there's no expectation. Oh, he didn't invite me or he did this without me. Whereas I know for me, like a lot of the 20s experiences are that, especially in group friendships. Oh, she did this. We didn't go together. Like, it's like that. And so I think using that as an example is like a really good setting stage for what group friendships should look like. On the outside, it may all look perfect, but it's just about, you showing up for each other.
Women's friendships seem somehow to have gotten this idea that, right, like so much of the value we see in our female friendships is about sharing deeply and being vulnerable and supporting each other and holding each other through hard things. And that is all valuable. I'm not saying don't do that. But the thing I agree with you that I really admire about a lot of men's friendships is they still value just doing things together.
Yes.
Going and partaking in an activity. And if they get into a deeper conversation, that's great. But if not, they also just spent time together. And I think there's a balance there. And like I have episodes on men's friendship. But women, I think, need to think about that. Like having fun is a form of support and connection. It doesn't always just need to be the deepest conversations. Even just going and shopping together, running errands together, reading silently in a house together, going to a cocktail making class where you really don't chat. Like that's all worth it.
Yeah. Shared experiences. I think that we put so little value in that, and there needs to be more. And guys, they do it so well where it's like, they're just in a fantasy football league. Yep. And because of that shared experience, it's like they're constantly talking to each other, they're connected. And through that, they learn little things about what's happening in each other's lives. And that becomes how the friendship continues to grow from your teens to your 20s, to your 30s, your 40s. And then, I think it's such a beautiful thing. And I think I said, we don't talk enough about friendships. I think we don't talk enough about how men really know how to, deal with their friendships for the most part. Again, generalizing based on the experiences that I've seen, but there's a lot to learn there.
Yeah, there are things to pay attention to. And it just creates some like ease. If you think about it, all the memes and the things out there, like, I hope my friends cancel. My question to you would be, how much of that is because you know how maybe intense the hangout needs to be for it to be worth it? How you have to open up. You have to share. You have to listen to the hard stuff. What if sometimes it was just easy? You just showed up and you did an act. You played tennis together and you went home.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that make it a little easier sometimes?
Absolutely. And it's for me, again, this is like really ripping off the Band-Aid here, but it's the plans that I always want canceled where I don't want to go in the first place. And it's because I probably shouldn't have made them because I'm just either people pleasing, saying yes to something I don't want to, or I don't want to your point, be vulnerable with this person and then make it a whole thing. And so it's a check for you to be like, if you really wanted this plan, you wouldn't want it to be canceled. Right? Because it's not always, those memes are funny and I post them all the time, but I love seeing my friends. So it's really the ones that you're like, should you have done this in the first place?
Yeah. And that's not to say I never want to be open or vulnerable, but I think that sometimes because there's all this pressure, it's like we wish we could cancel and then we keep kicking that hangout further and further out on our calendar because now more stuff's building up and you're going to have to share it all and you're going to have to dive deep into all of it. And if it was more permissible to just say, hey, I really don't have capacity to do this deep dive tonight, but I would love to get together and just go on a bike ride.
Yeah.
And talk about mindless stuff. You would still get to spend time together. And then it would also create the opportunity for maybe some simpler stuff to come up, but more so for you to, at the end of that, be like, okay, well, when are we biking again? When are we doing this? And that's what I think is really admirable. Like you were saying about men's friendships, is they have this frequency because it's not so intense.
Yes, it's simple. And sometimes I think we don't live in simple times.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of our days are complicated, and friendships should be one of those things that should create simplicity and ease in our lives. And as women, I think we overcomplicate it sometimes by getting in our own heads. And I know I do this all the time. And it just last week, I was supposed to meet a friend for drinks, and, we were going to sit down and chat. And then she was like, wait, do you want to just like get coffee? And she needed to go to Sephora and run some errands. And I was like, my ears perked up because I was having such a hectic day. And I was like, yes, I would love to do that. And we just walked around Sephora, trying on makeup, and we still connected. We saw each other, and then we both went home.
Yeah.
And it was great. And I don't know, that really like filled my cup, and I didn't think it would. And I was like, okay, that's an interesting takeaway, to be like, you don't always have to just get a drink or get coffee and sit down and have a meal to be one-on-one.
Yeah. And I think what you're talking about is there's something about just kind of being able to fold each other into our lives as adults. That also, right? Trying to find a dedicated block of time to do nothing else is really hard. And we do it because we care about our people, but we would maybe have more frequency if we could do things like run to Sephora or run an errand.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
Folding it in
because
makes it easier.
Time is of the essence. Like we don't have a lot of it. And so if you're really spending 20 or 30 or an hour with someone, you really want to make sure that it's meaningful, but it's also like you're spending it the right way. That's adding value to both your lives.
Yeah. And there's a lot of ways for there to be value. I think that's where we're getting here.
Exactly. There's not one definition. It can be a lot of things, as simple as, just like going to Sephora and shopping together.
Yeah, and getting to do that together.
Exactly.
And like have fun talking about the various things you're buying and not having to send it all via text later, and like getting to be in the moment. Like
exactly.
That's valuable.
Yeah.
This has been, I gotta wrap it up because you and I could talk.
Yeah. I could talk for that forever.
About this all day.
Yeah.
And I
even
just recording this episode, I was like, wait, hold on. We should record an episode on that. And we should record an episode on that. And we should record an episode on that.
Well, I am happy. We have so much to talk about. And I love the approach you have to friendships and just opening up this space to talk about it and having a dedicated friendship space. I think that's really key. So I love that. And yeah, I'm inspired.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. This has been a lovely conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to keep learning about friendships from you and your guests.
I walked away with gems from this one. And maybe just an appreciation for how much, I don't want to say better my friendships are, but how much work my friends and I have done to grow and change and shift and get better at just being in relationship with each other and communicating, being respectful, adjusting with big life changes. Like, I'm proud of me. So if you listen to this and some of these hit home with you, I hope that you are proud of you because you've done a lot of work. And like I mentioned in the podcast episode, like I still have work to do. This is just a never-ending journey. Now, if you are looking for a new podcast to add to your roster, I can't suggest The Modern Millennial enough. It's like hanging out with a friend to put it in, put your AirPods in and listen to Arpita. It's that lovely mix of serious conversation and lifestyle, beauty, life. Like, it really just feels like you're hanging out with a friend. And I have enjoyed every episode that I've listened to. Thank you so much for tuning in today. See you again next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Friendship IRL. I am so honored to have these conversations with you, but don't let the chat die here. Send me a voice message. I created a special website just to chat with you. You can find it at alex.chat. You can also find me on Instagram. My handle @it's Alex Alexander, or go ahead and leave a review wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. Now, if you want to take this conversation a step further, send this episode to a friend. Tell them you found it interesting and use what we just talked about as a conversation starter the next time you and your friend hang out. No need for a teary goodbye. I'll be back with a new episode next week.